Hi, and welcome to Intelligent Speculation. My name is Jonathan. I am the founder and creator of the brand, so I hope that you like what you've seen so far. Anyway, that being said, getting started here, I'm going to be making a series of videos accompanying each of the blog posts. So we're going to get started with the first one today. What exactly is critical thinking? That being said, the definition of critical thinking is rather fluid and it's entirely dependent upon your source. However, there are a number of common descriptions surrounding its definition, which are objective and rational analysis of facts, disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, creative, open-minded, and informed by evidence, or the ability to engage in reflective and independent thinking, which includes self-reflection. As you can see, a common theme among all three definitions is that you must follow a proper system of thought and remain objective. Now, remaining objective is very hard to do. However, as a critical thinker, you must give it your best effort to do so. Also, creativity is something that I added of my own accord into one of the definitions, as I believe that as a critical thinker, you need to be able to make connections across vast swaths of ostensibly disconnected information, which takes creativity. And you must be able to embrace a touch of iconoclasm or more out-of-the-box type thinking while avoiding nihilism. And nihilism would be like a burn the house to the ground type scenario. So you want to push the boundaries, but you don't want to go so far as saying everything is wrong and we need to just burn it all to the ground and start over. So yeah, as a critical thinker, yeah, you definitely need to push the boundaries a little bit. Next up, we have the laws of critical thinking. So these are my axioms. This is what I believe it takes to be a critical thinker in today's world, based off of all the information that I have gathered to date. So first off, the first law of critical thinking is that you must understand how to structure a good argument. So there's basically two things that you need to know in there. So first off, you need to understand the structure of an argument. And then you also need to go a step further and then understand what it means to be able to structure a good argument. The foundations that you should guide your life by should be structured with good arguments. So which means conversely that you need to understand what bad arguments are as well. Moving on, the second law of critical thinking is that you must grok informal logic. So grok is a term that's been co-opted from science fiction to mean basically that you need to have a deep and thorough understanding of informal logic. So informal logic would be argument types, validity, soundness. So these, along with logical fallacies, some of these things you probably aren't familiar with because these words are specific to when you dive deeper into logic, which you will do as a critical thinker and you must do. Okay, the third law of critical thinking is that you need to understand heuristics and how that can lead to pitfalls in cognition known as cognitive biases. So cognitive biases have been around for a number of decades now, and basically what they are is inherent flaws in the human mind. So the mind is not designed to be perfect. There are a number of shortcuts that are programmed into it in order to help you to survive. However, these shortcuts can lead you to errors in cognition or just flaws in thinking, essentially. So it's a bit terrifying, but it's also a bit liberating because perfection is not attainable. However, at the same time, walking around knowing that you're inherently flawed and knowing that your decisions are prone to be flawed, essentially the vast majority of the time, can be a bit terrifying. However, once you are aware of cognitive biases, there are a number of steps that can be taken to help mitigate it. Now, you can't ever completely get rid of cognitive biases, but you can mitigate it. And by mitigation, if you can lessen their impact, it should lead you towards better decision making. The fourth law of critical thinking, be intellectually humble. That is, constantly subject one's own belief to an objective analysis and update accordingly. There's no shame in admitting that you're wrong, as it's impossible to know everything all of the time. Yeah, so this point is very important. You need to learn how to accept that you're not going to be right all of the time. Even the most learned or knowledgeable individuals of our society are never right 100% of the time. They don't get 100% on their homeworks all of the time, 100% in life, whatever. Everybody makes mistakes. It's okay. You need to move on with it. But when you're wrong and you've been presented with evidence and it's repeated over a long period of time that indicates that you're wrong, you need to accept that, Let it go. You probably feel these defensive types of feelings welling up inside your HPA axis, or that's basically your survival system. So the adrenals, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland kicking in, saying, "Oh, I gotta fight." But once you get to a point and you realize that you are wrong, just admit and move on. There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody should shame you for it. Just don't persist in this wrong worldview. So, fourth law of critical thinking. Okay. So now the next one, the fifth law, is that you need to embrace holistic thinking. So what exactly is holistic thinking? Holistic thinking is looking at the bigger picture, okay? So current scientific methodologies like zooms in closer and closer and closer and pinpoints certain mechanisms of action, which is important. However, you also need to be able to always keep an eye on the bigger picture, how everything is connected. Also, this means that when you're approaching a subject, for example, politics in the United States, we have the Democrats on one side, or liberals, and then the Republicans or conservatives on the other. What you need to do then is be able to look at both sides of the argument. You can't get a complete worldview by looking strictly at one side. That's just not going to happen. If you move, in general, this is a fair rule in general, if you're moving to an extreme in one view, it's probably not a good place to be. You're probably missing out on some information. Plus, once you get to an extreme, it's very difficult to communicate with other people because you start to incorporate yourself with what's known as an echo chamber, and you just have, it's self-reinforcing, and it can lead to very poor decision making in general. So anyway, embrace holistic thinking. So big picture thinking and also looking at both sides of the picture. Number 6, know how to identify a credible source. So in today's world, I cannot stress to you enough how important this is. You need to be able to discern a good source from a bad source, because a good source of information has a very high probability of presenting you with facts. And unfortunately, in today's climate, it appears as though facts are more difficult than ever to get a hold of. So yes, you need to be able to discern credible sources from non-credible sources. So for example, Wikipedia in general is a good source. However, in academic realms, we generally don't recommend it just because anybody can contribute to it. However, given the number of years that it's been around and the number of academic eyes or critical eyes that have analyzed this throughout the world, Wikipedia in general is a very good source of information. Now, conversely, moving over to YouTube, YouTube is full of nonsense. You have people eating Tide Pods, you have flat Earth videos, you have people talking about or trying to scare people about vaccinations. In general, YouTube is not a good source of information, unless, let's say, it's a video from a very credible source, an academic researcher or something of that nature. Then it has a higher probability of being credible. But in general, for those of you who are watching this at home, I don't recommend YouTube being a credible source of information. Now, that being said, you're watching this at home and it's posted to YouTube. What I mean is that when you come across a video on YouTube, you can't automatically say, yeah, this is credible, this person knows what they're talking about, okay? You have to do your due diligence and do research into that particular person who's talking and see if they actually are a credible individual. Because if they're not, then don't take that video seriously. But in general, like I said, going back to Wikipedia, Wikipedia is well referenced, and in general you can, in my opinion, and in other academics' opinions, you can take it as a credible source of information, okay? But in general, again, Rule 6, you must be able to identify a credible source. So moving on to the 7th law of critical thinking, be a skeptic and demand evidence. So skepticism is basically the idea that when you're presented with new information, you don't automatically assimilate it. You don't automatically reject it either. You remain what's known as skeptical, and then you dig further. So that's what I mean by demand evidence. You want to dig further into the issue at hand. You don't want to automatically accept it or reject it. You want to take the stance of, okay, I'm going to be skeptical. I'm not going to automatically believe it, but I want to look further into it. Now, again, if it's something completely outlandish, like somebody coming at you with like some sort of flat earth stuff, and we've known the earth has been round for 500 plus years, then yeah, you probably can automatically reject it. But in general, with today's the plethora of new science coming out, new information. Seems like there's a breaking news story every other day on the news. You don't want to automatically dismiss or accept it. Just say, I'm going to dig further into it and try to find out what the facts are. Look at the evidence. Last but not least, we have the 8th law of critical thinking. You need to understand how and why science works, because to date it is the best tool that humans have invented to learn truths about our world. Now, it's very important that you understand that it's a tool, it's not a belief system. The scientific method or process is a rigorous methodology that we have invented over the years in order to learn truths about the world. And it is very difficult, it's very hard. However, one of the goals of this platform is to teach you how to think more like a scientist. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to become a scientist. However, I can teach you some of the skill sets and the critical thinking tools that scientists use in everyday research and everyday lab life in order to reach these conclusions or truths about the world. And some of these can be transferred over to the average person. So again, I mean, you won't be a scientist, but you will obtain some of the critical thinking skills that your average scientist does use, including myself. All right, critical thinking should and not be confused with being critical or argumentative of others. While critical thinking should be used to expose logical fallacies and other logical pitfalls, it can also be used in a constructive manner. So for example, critical thinking can be used to improve one's ethics, help with knowledge acquisition, bolster arguments, etc. Further, critical thinking shouldn't be confused with knowledge accumulation. Simply memorizing facts and regurgitating them without any original thought is not critical thinking. A critical thinker must be able to think through problems logically and reach conclusions through sound reasoning. Moreover, a well-trained critical thinker must be able to identify critical sources of information when formulating a position on a particular topic. So that goes back to the 6th law of critical thinking. You need to be able to identify a credible source of information. Further, I hope it's clear that critical thinking isn't just regurgitating facts. I do know a lot of people who read things and then just recite them verbatim, but that isn't critical thinking. Unfortunately, sometimes that is how our tests are formulated in the education system, but it's important for you to understand that life or critical thinking in general is not just regurgitating facts. Okay? So why is this all important? Why should you know critical thinking? Well, critical thinking is a domain general thinking skill. The ability to think clearly and rationally is important in whatever you choose to do. If you work in education, research, finance, management, or the legal profession, then critical thinking is obviously important. But critical thinking skills are not restricted to a particular subject area. Being able to think well and solve problems systematically is an asset for any career. And I can't stress that enough, and going back to why I even started this platform to begin with, critical thinking is so important, particularly for the average person these days. So you walk around with an incredible tool in your pocket, your smartphone. However, you're bombarded constantly with all of this information, and your filters don't know how to separate out the good from the bad. At least people, the level of the degree of how effective their filters are is really person dependent. Some people are better than it than others, but basically what I've observed over the past 2 to 3 years is that the average individual doesn't have a really good filter from filtering out the good from the bad. So anyway, critical thinking will definitely help you to refine that filter. Not only that, but you'll have spillover effects, positive spillover effects in many different aspects of your life. Critical thinking is very important in the knowledge economy. The global knowledge economy is driven by information and technology. One has to be able to deal with changes quickly and effectively. The new economy places increasing demands on flexible intellectual skills and the ability to analyze information and integrate diverse sources of knowledge in solving problems. Good critical thinking promotes such thinking skills and is very important in the fast-changing workplace. Critical thinking enhances language and presentation skills. Thinking clearly and systematically can improve the way we express our ideas. In learning how to analyze the logical structure of texts, critical thinking also improves comprehension ability. Also, critical thinking promotes creativity. To come up with a creative solution to a problem involves not just having new ideas. It must also be the case that the new ideas being generated are useful and relevant to the task at hand. Critical thinking plays a crucial role in evaluating new ideas, selecting the best ones, and modifying them if necessary. Critical thinking is crucial for self-reflection. So this goes back to the fourth law of critical thinking. In order to live a meaningful life and to structure our lives accordingly, we need to justify and reflect on our values and decisions. Critical thinking provides the tools for this process of self-evaluation. So yes, be intellectually humble, engage in self-reflection or self-evaluation from time to time. Your current worldview, my current worldview is not correct. It's not complete. It's always changing because we're always learning new things about the world. So definitely be open to change and don't be too hard on yourself and don't resist too much to the change. Good critical thinking is the foundation of science and democracy. Science requires the critical use of reason and experimentation and theory confirmation. The proper functioning of a liberal democracy requires citizens who can think critically about social issues to inform their judgments about proper governance and to overcome biases and prejudice. Yes, so critical thinking is very, very important, particularly when applied to government. So that means that for the average person, one of your most fundamental and important civic duties is voting. So there's so much nonsense in politics these days. An incredible amount of drama and hyperbole is injected into everyday politics, and it's really, really important for you to dig through the nonsense and get to the facts. So critical thinking will help you to get there. Okay, wrapping things up here. In a world where we are increasingly bombarded with misinformation and opportunists looking to capitalize on our naivety, critical thinking is more important than ever. In an attempt to better arm society against this onslaught on reason, this platform is designed to equip the reader with the necessary skill set for defense. Within the pages of the site, topics ranging from the structure of an argument, what makes an argument good, logical fallacies, cognitive biases, the scientific method, and many more are presented in an attempt to foster the development of a more critical mind. I encourage you to read and reread each post until this knowledge becomes second nature, as we are often required to make important decisions in an instant. The world can be a highly irrational place, but hopefully after reading through this site, it will have gained one more critical thinker and become a better place as a result. Alrighty folks, that's all I've got for today. Until next time, remember to practice your laws of critical thinking and always think critically.